Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is...
I'm that Matt kid.
I'm that Steve kid.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Plagiarist. I'll see you in court.
Okay, but only if he also signs off with the erotic blah 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 lover.
There you go.
I already called erotic Clippy lover.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a reference that no one will get. Anyway.
Oh please, anyone watches this show?
No one watches this show. It's amazing. It's that's how you don't get canceled, guys. You just make content that no one wants to watch.
Modern problems require modern solutions.
right. So anyway, today we're doing an episode on the idea that kind of came up and got talked about for a while last week, which is just the technological influences on the filmmaking process. And if we wanted to, we could broaden this out a lot and talk about like technological impact on the artistic process, but I think that doing it just limited in it to filmmaking will lead to a more specific conversation that will still be pretty much applicable to everything else. Because film's an interesting one where it's like, it is dependent upon a technological revolution, but regardless of that, there have been people throughout the industry and in its long history that have resisted technological innovation and influence, and those that have pushed to further it and further it. For every James Cameron or George Lucas, there's a Christopher Nolan that just don't seem to like the boat rocking too much, whereas like Lucas and Cameron are always trying to push the technology of filmmaking further and further. And it's just really, really interesting area of discussion, I feel. So, all that being said, I guess I should just see here, who in this call kind of sides more with the, I guess the Cameron-Lucas camp of embracing and furthering and pushing the technology in film to widen the filmmaker's toolkit, as it were, is a good thing, versus who here thinks like more in the Nolan camp of film should be doing as much in camera on set as possible and not becoming overly reliant on technological innovation.
I mean, that's just tough for me because I feel like it's hard for me to just pick a definitive side, because at the end of the day, I'm always in favor of pushing boundaries, whether they be technological or creative, because that is going to potentially or inherently really open the door for new creative ideas and new creative sort of processes and options. But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for Nolan's approach, which is just that, this is the art of film is the art of filming shit. And the more shit we can actually film, I think that generally is going to give you a more impressive thing. So I'm like, I don't know. It just depends, because at the end of the day, while I do love pushing technology, I think like we talked about in the Obi-Wan thing, I don't want the push for technology to become a replacement for stuff that works very, very well at what it does.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I have criticisms and talk on end about how much technology is killing the planet, I don't really have like a clean one way or the other. My problem isn't so much that we need to be the Nolan purists on film or the Cameron pushing the envelope. My problem is more so that we have less and less people in the industry that have a vision for what technology can do or have a vision for what traditional can do. And instead, we have more and more people utilizing technologies in uneducated ways that leads to problems that they're not foreseeing. Like when we talked about the LED screen displays. In general, the problem with technology is not that technology is a good thing or a bad thing inherently. It's that how you use technology is going to dictate how things respond to it, how the industry functions, how people engage with your media. And we use that in such childish ways where we are not aware of, or we resist being aware of what that technology is doing, so that it just gets taken for granted ad nauseum until it feels normal, when certain people like Cameron are very smart about these things and are very intentional about what the technology is doing. So for example, Avatar is a movie that uses almost every shot in that movie is a digital effect shot. But Cameron understands how filmmaking works. And so there are actual camera movements and POV shots when it comes to the action scenes in Avatar, versus something like Jurassic World, where they're not coming from any perspective. They are just CGI. So the problem isn't that one film is shot on digital or another film is shot on digital. The problem isn't that they're using CGI or not using CGI. It's that there's a difference between the technology's here and just use it versus the technology allows us to do a thing. Let's think about how we're doing it.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. Because I mean, you look at like Judgment Day, like Terminator 2, right? So like the T-1000, that could not be accomplished any other way than to heavily pioneer computer-generated effects. That was the only way to make that work. That was not pushing the technological boundaries for the sake of it, because we can. That was, I have a vision, and the only way to achieve that vision is to push these technological limits. And I think that's where I tend to side with that, because I'm all for pushing technological limits, but purposefully, like with reason, because otherwise you just end up using these technologies pointlessly and often needlessly, and it often makes whatever creative work you're doing feel lesser because of it. I mean, people make fun of the prequels all the time for having just these CGI backdrops that feel completely hollow and artificial. And I think that's an example of, you're taking this technology and you're not using it because it's truly the best thing for what you're trying to achieve. You're just using it to use it. And I guess that's where I kind of fall off from just wanting to push the technology all the time.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because if in almost every interview Lucas gave while the prequels are coming out that I've ever seen, he pretty much just like admitted that he was just doing it because he wanted to push what digital filmmaking was capable of, because he found it like fascinating. And he, like, it's still his opinion to this day, because one of his problems with the Star Wars sequels was they did too much stuff traditionally. They used too much animatronics and practical effects and like makeup and stuff, and he didn't like that because that's the old way. He wanted to see them push things forward and do more. If I remember correctly, I think he said that he was actually quite a fan of Mandalorian for the use of the LED screens in the background. So it's interesting to see, because that is one of the biggest criticisms of the Star Wars prequels, is the fact that they look so artificial, and you know, the technology he was pushing at the time has, in a funny kind of way, dated those films. And this may be a good thing, honestly. It's dated those films in a way that like the original Star Wars films aren't dated, because the original Star Wars films shot on film. The negatives still exist by and large. I think a couple things have been destroyed over time, but the negative still exists. The film can always be blown up, upscaled, the resolution can be increased to meet more modern standards. Whereas the prequels, Lucas basically commissioned Sony to make the first HD camera, and he shot at least the second two. I'm not sure about the first one, but he shot them on a digital camera that captured it in 1080p resolution. And so, digital upscaling exists, and it has varied effects, but the best resolution for the true thing that was shot for the Star Wars prequels will always be 1080p. And it's kind of, it's good, but when like fucking YouTube videos are in 4K now, it's kind of like, oops. So just things like that are quite amusing to me, and it's funny. Overall, I think I am like more in just the Cameron and Lucas camp, even if I don't particularly like how like fuck the narrative, fuck the art. I just want to play with these toys that those guys can get. I think Cameron's slightly better about it than Lucas got, where it just became like ridiculous. I remember a couple of years ago. I feel like this is just gonna be a review of the Star Wars prequels filmmaking. Yep. I remember a couple of years ago, like someone pointed out that you can actually see the in like the famous scene with Anakin and Palpatine at the opera. You can see that like Lucas had told them to go in and like digitally change Anakin's expression in a moment of the film, and you can kind of see the behind the scenes of how they did it, and it looks, you have to notice it. It doesn't look crap wholesale, but you do have to notice it. But then once you notice it, it's really hard to unnotice that he essentially like came in and used the warp tool, and it doesn't look the greatest today. And it was just to get a slightly different expression on the actor's face, and like, that seems ridiculous, George. Come on.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, on some level, I'm glad that creators with that mentality exist, though, because it's like with like any form of like avant-garde art or any form of just experimental art, be it filmmaking, music, whatever, I may not like these things listening to them on their own or watching them on their own or just consuming experimental or avant-garde work on their own, but I'm glad that it's happening so that other filmmakers, other creatives can pull from that and can use those ideas and use those techniques in something that's a little bit less experimental. And so by that same token, I'm glad that your James Camerons and your George Lucases exist, because if they are not the ones pushing the boundaries of technology, then we might not get some of these crazy, awesome technologies that potentially a slightly more, I don't know, what's the word, discerning filmmaker may use in a more, more sparingly, in a way that works a little bit better, that feels a little bit more natural, that complements the film a little bit better and doesn't feel quite so artificial. So it's just like, I don't generally like the approach taken with how George Lucas handled the special effects and the general kind of aesthetic of the prequels, but I'm kind of glad it happened, because it did pioneer a bunch of shit that other people can use better. Like, so yeah, that's kind of where I fall with it, to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
I know. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, and part of the thing is you have people like Lucas and Cameron, who we keep mentioning, that did a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the public's general appreciation for digital technology. And as things get further and further out of hand, it's not particularly apt to blame them for when things go wrong. Because when you go back to like old George Lucas interviews, and he talks about how, like you said, digital is going to take over and that traditional film is going to go away and that there's a huge revolution brewing, and how he talks about how the beauty of digital cameras is that it democratizes the film process. And so you get a lot of studios and you get a lot of producers and directors saying we're going to shoot things in digital because digital is cheaper. And that's the big draw, is that because you don't have to preserve film canisters, because you don't have to deal with getting everything produced on basically a day late. You can see dailies immediately. All of that stuff saves a ton of money in the production process, and so it's supposed to democratize filmmaking. That it was supposed to read like a revolution of independent filmmakers, because now anyone can own a digital camera and just shoot something. And the problems we've seen the last few years of the death of independent cinema, the death of the mid-budget movie, the rising prices for high quality digital cameras that you would use for movie making, how you have to rent them out from specific companies and studios at astronomical prices. A lot of that's because when they were saying that back in the day in like 2005, 2006 about how cheap digital would be, it's because they weren't weighing the other side of the production that digital created, which is what I mean when I say advancing technology is one thing, but not thinking about how it changes the stuff around you is the problem. Because okay, fine, you're not preserving film canisters anymore. You're not having to worry about damaging negatives anymore. You're not wasting a whole day of production waiting for film to develop and then see what it looks like on the other end. But the amount of money it takes to digitally correct something shot on one day, the amount of money it takes to add in special effects, the changeover in lighting equipment, the changeover in makeup artists and stuff, all of the material things that have to be turned over to accommodate digital that were previously all designed for film adds up, which is why the costs for these movies have not gone down. Because in theory, a digital camera is cheaper, but overhauling an entire production system that's been using film for 80 years is not cheap at all. And to this day, I don't think we've recouped that cost the way someone like George Lucas has wanted to do.
Yeah, but I mean, it is also worth talking about how, like, the transition to digital has had the positive effects that Lucas was talking about. Because I think a really good example is someone like Kevin Smith versus, oh crap, what's his name? The Chronicle. The name of the director of Chronicle.
Oh, Josh Trank.
Yeah.
Josh Trank. Not the best guy in the world, but I think it's worth note. So you have like Kevin Smith, who at a very similar age to Trank makes a film that's a wild success, but like the thing that everyone notices about Clerks right away is like, oh, it's in black and white. And it seems like it's in black and white as some kind of artistic choice, but no, fucking color film was just more expensive. And Smith was making it on a shoestring budget, so he used black and white film. Whereas you have like Trank and other young kids coming up 20 some odd years later, making films using digital cameras, and they're able to produce something that not 100% looks like what you would be used to seeing in theaters, but pretty damn close. Just depending on how much their own personal knowledge of how to light and edit and color correct your own digital footage is. So I think, yeah, the idea that it would be cheaper for the entire industry, no, that seemed to have fizzled out. The idea that there are options for it to be cheaper for the individual, I think that has panned out beautifully, especially considering that some people's fucking phones can shoot in damn near 4K video at this point in time.
Well, I mean, there's a whole thriller that came out a few years ago called Unsane. The entire thing was shot on an iPhone.
Yeah, I mean, like, end of the day, they do a, like, your red epics or whatever, yeah, those can still be crazy priced. And there's certainly, you can shoot something on a red epic versus shooting it on an iPhone, and I'm pretty sure even the least discerning eye will be able to tell some of the differences in the clarity and scope of the picture you're getting. But as long as you know what you're doing, if you know how to shoot, if if you know how to light and compose your scenes, it's that line starts to blur really fast.
Oh, that's 100% true. It mirrors the transition from analog to digital audio recording in that same way. Like, if you know what you're doing, you can make digital sound pretty close to analog, because it's less about kind of using that same technology. It's more about understanding what makes that initial technology resonate and how you can approximate and replicate that. And just like with digital film, digital audio, digital recording, digital mixing and mastering has become significantly more available for independent and like one-man band type situations. And so I think that you're absolutely right. I think it has created a bit of a revolution for people who are making not even just like film, like cinema, but like people who just make cool shit on YouTube, and it can be really well shot and really well edited and really all this thing. So I mean, the advancement of that technology has only allowed people to make more professional quality work at a fraction of the cost, and that's extremely cool.
To your point, real quick, about if you know what you're doing, how the changeover from analog to digital can be seamless, or how you can make one seem like the other. Knives Out is a really good example of this, because Knives Out is a film that's shot on digital, and when it came out, a bunch of people started thanking Rian Johnson for making this great whodunit shot on film, even though it wasn't shot on film. And the key to that was that the cinematographer Steve Yeldon basically came up with an algorithm that accounted for what about shooting on film created certain kinds of effects on the screen. So the way light appears out of a window in rooms looks very different on film. So we basically found a way to reverse engineer that with digital cameras, so that you can create that same lighting effect on a digital camera as opposed to doing it on film. And so even if you're like a film snob that only watches things filmed on film, you can watch that movie and not tell the difference between the digital and the film, because it's designed knowing exactly what about film resonates with people.
I mean, it's a fascinating topic. I remember we did a whole episode on just digital versus film, so I don't want to spend too much more time just talking about that aspect of things. One thing that we talked about a little bit last week, and I do think it'd be worth talking about a little bit more, is the evolution of how new technologies allow for different, I guess I'd just call it effects on film. So the one that immediately came to mind for me, and I do think is a really interesting direct evolution, like you can do the ape to man kind of transition here, is going from painted backdrops to your LED screens. And so you got like painted backdrops and matte paintings and stuff, all the way to green and blue screen work to the LEDs, which are, in a fun way, it's like a combination of those two things, where you've got the environment now that you would have previously filmed the actor in front of and then put the actor into the CG environment after the fact. Now you're just making the CG environment beforehand and putting the actor in front of it, which is like a roundabout way of doing the matte painting. And it's really funny because a lot of people online really love matte paintings. They think they're just like the coolest shit. And I do think they are absolutely fascinating. But it's funny how people will criticize the evolution toward blue screens, and I've seen less criticism of the LED screens, but those are so new. I just don't think there's been enough time yet. But like there was a lot of hate on blue screens, and it looks so fake, it doesn't look like they're there, it looks like trash. And the matte paintings are always better, always better. And of course the answer is no, they're not always better. It's just some people know how to shoot them better. And some people know how to shoot blue screen better than, fucking like Birdemic level shit. And so I think the interesting thing is, like, for every example of really bad, obvious blue screen, green screen work, like The example that comes to mind for me, because I'm like 99% sure of this, is that I don't think Anthony Hopkins was in front of a camera with Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston for Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, that was
I
a
don't think
reshoot,
those.
yeah.
I don't think any of them were on camera at the same time, because the scene that they have together is terrible and it's like very obviously green screen. So for every example like that, the idea that like the matte paintings are always so much better also goes right down the tank for me, because guess what I've been doing over the last couple weeks? I've started watching classic Doctor Who. And you know what's funny about classic Doctor Who is the number of times you open a shot with a really gorgeous matte painting on an alien planet or in a big space station or whatever that shows you just the intense scale of what you're looking at, and then the actor stands literally 2 feet in front of it and casts a fucking shadow on the thing, and it looks like shit. So I think it's really, like, I'm just waiting for the same thing to start happening with the LCD screens, because it's literally like, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to fucking run into that. So in a fun way, the people that went to school or like, you know, cut their teeth learning filmmaking in front of blue screens now are probably going to fuck up and end up shooting things on LCD screens where you're going to have a lot of the same problems that people that cut their teeth learning how to shoot with matte paintings learn to avoid these kinds of problems. So it's going to be a fun little cycle of evolution I'd be willing to bet money on.
I don't know. I wonder if it's one of those things where it's just like film nerds who prefer like a matte painting that you can tell is a fucking matte painting over CG just because it's a matte painting and they think it's cool. Because like you see shit like that all the time of people who like prefer the old ways of doing things over the new ways simply because it's the older method of doing things. And even if you can tell that something is a costume or a matte painting or a puppet or a this or that or another, they would rather you be able to tell that it's an illusion but have the method be really interesting and cool to them than not be able to tell it's an illusion and have it be like green screen. Because I've definitely met people like that. I'm telling you, in the same way that fucking high school makes people not interested in reading, film school will make you really hate film because you spend your time around film bros, and I hate them.
All film bros are bad. Yeah, no, I think there is definitely an element of that when we talk about like the influence of technology. I think there is just this like knee-jerk reaction of, I don't care if it's better and harder to discern what's real and what's not. I want the old way of doing things.
Right.
Like when the initial when like you go back to Rogue One, a lot of people would, you know, stand up and down and rant and rave about how bad Tarkin looked, and it didn't look real, and he looked like a PS2 cutscene was the comment I saw thrown around a lot, which is just
What PS2
like
games were you playing?
right? Hyperbole is one thing, but like everyone needs to stop trying to have like the take that just like the scathing review one-liner take, because that's objectively not true, and it's just insulting to the artistry that went into creating Tarkin for Rogue One. And so like it was funny though, because there were people that watched the movie that had no idea of the controversy and craziness of the background of basically resurrecting Peter Cushing's visage for film that went into it for Rogue One. And they watched the movie, and then they were told that after the fact. And the reaction, by and large, was, oh wait, that wasn't a real guy? There were some people who could tell something was off or something didn't quite look right, and they were bothered by it in that uncanny valley way. And maybe those people are just really good at recognizing human faces, I don't know. But vast majority of people did not know that Tarkin was a digital replacement. So all this is to say, when you get down to like this argument about like, oh, I don't care if it looks better, I just want it done this way because this is what, like, this is the more artistic method, or this is the more traditional way of doing it, or whatever it is. And that, it drives me a little crazy, because it's like, the end result, I don't think, at least personally, I give a fuck about the filmmaking process. 9 times out of 10, I'm interested in the end result. There are some movies where the story of how a thing was made or done is about 10 times more fascinating than the thing itself. But man, if you make a movie that isn't even slightly passable of interesting, I don't give a fuck about what you did behind the scenes to make it happen. There's very few movies, and they're all objectively terrible, where the behind the scenes story is more interesting than the story of the film itself. I think one of them is the 90s remake of Island of Dr. Moreau, which involved the guy who wrote the film and was the original director, got fired, but then just ran into the jungle and like kept eavesdropping on the set as they produced the rest of the movie. So but yeah, I don't, personally at least, I very rarely care about the behind the scenes of a film. I'm more interested in what the thing itself is presenting. And matte paintings are cool and fun and all, but end of the day, you can usually tell it's a fucking matte painting. You just see it, no matter how well you shoot it, it looks too static. Not enough is happening. It looks unrealistic. Whereas even the most basic, competent blue screen, green screen, chroma key work is always, in my opinion, going to look more believable and require less suspension of disbelief than a matte painting. Mm-hmm. I will make that broad-faced statement. And then to further that, the most incompetent LCD screen shooting is still probably going to look more believable, require less suspension of disbelief than the best matte painting. And that one I might be on shakier ground with, but I'll put the hot take out there. I'll cancel me over that one, bitches.
And I don't know. There's a couple shots in Kenobi where the background looks like a bad matte painting. Because, I mean, what are LCD screens or whatever, or LED screens, if not just super advanced matte paintings? Exactly. So I feel like you have the potential to run into the same problems, just with the benefit of like there's actual lighting coming from the screens that can be used, as opposed to getting like little artifacts of blue and green in your shit. So like, but yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I feel like it also, like, because then you just get into the artistic intent, because obviously for some people, for some projects, for some directors, the look of a matte painting is what they're going for whatever fucking reason. So that kind of gets more into kind of what you were talking about, how like, well, we don't want to get too much into like the artistic intent or whatever. But I think broadly speaking, just general audience, general filmmakers that are just going for what is going to look most photorealistic, I think you're probably right.
And again, like, if your intent as a filmmaker is to make a commentary or set a vibe that a matte painting will deliver better than blue screen or LED screen, was I saying LCD that whole fucking time? I feel stupid now. Anyway, if your intent as a filmmaker is to say something or do something on film, like if you want a character, what's a good example? The fucking like Little Shop of Horrors where the like plants start ripping through the matte paintings and stuff. Yeah. I think that happens. Like if you want to have a character rip through it to like make a gag out of it or some kind of commentary, I think Blazing Saddles is another good example where like the sets start falling down and you see that they're all like facades. Like that's one thing. But I feel like 90% of the time the intent of what you're doing, what you're shooting, that requires some kind of false background, let's call it. Your intent isn't for the audience to be focused on the false background. Your intent is for your audience to be focused on the characters, the talent on screen, the setting, and where things are in the story you're telling. You know, you kind of want... Matte paintings are like a lot of visual effects on film. They're at their best when the audience isn't really paying attention to them and doesn't really think about them and is just experiencing the moment on film. Whether that be, you know, fucking alien popping out of John Hurt's chest or some kind of grand vista of an alien world or whatever. What the hope usually is to focus on a story beat or a beauty of a location, not the artistic intent behind the background.
I mean, I don't know. I think that's not completely fair. I think it makes viewing something sound like a lot less of an engaging mental activity than it can often be. Because you look at some movies and some filmmakers, people like Wes Anderson, who use 2D styles of filmmaking all the time, who have painted backgrounds, who have things going on dollies, and someone basically just running in place from left to right to create the illusion of being something flat. And you watch something like Grand Budapest Hotel, and the whole movie is, from very early on, it feels kind of flat. Everything is set up as a matte painting. The outers of the hotel are all clearly drawn. And when you get to certain scenes, like Ralph Fiennes in the lobby about to be arrested, the gag is that he runs back into the background. And it's funny, and it only lands because the movie up to that point is giving you that overt sense of, oh, this is a flat background, this is a cartoon, this is all 2D. And so when he breaks that space to reveal the fact that the set actually exists, it's funny now because now you've established the way this universe looks, and you're breaking that in a way where it is calling attention to itself. You don't watch the Grand Budapest Hotel and think that hotel looks real. You're not supposed to think it looks real. You're supposed to think it looks fake. And so when it is actually real, the joke lands. And again, the problem I think is less on does it look good or how real can we make it look versus how did we get to the point where decisions like let's just put this in CGI have become your natural go-to as opposed to a different solution for the same problem. I'm not saying necessarily that CGI is the wrong answer most of the time. I'm sure it is the right answer for most filmmakers now, or that blue screen is better than doing a matte painting. But I think the actual important question in terms of technological influence on filmmaking is what are we doing so that these choices we are making don't feel like choices anymore and just start to feel like standard practice, right? So you think about something like the death of independent movie theaters and the rise of megaplexes. So that megaplexes are basically the only kinds of theaters that are left standing. The reason for that is that as the independent cinema chains were going from the early 1920s up through like the 80s and 90s, when the turnover to digital happened, the capital that individual theaters would have to raise in order to convert their screens for digital projection was anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. And so the amount of money you'd have to sink into an independent theater to convert it for digital drove a lot of them out of business. And the ones that it didn't drive out of business forced them to take either some sort of deal with producers or take heavy amounts of money from Wall Street to help finance the revolution of the theaters. And so it forced a lot of individual independent movie theaters out, and it created the rise of things like Regal and AMC, where everything is a megaplex. And so the revolution from film to digital had a lot more to do with the fact that digital just kind of showed up and forced everyone else out of the room. Now, whether or not digital is better than film is a different question, but the idea that digital is the standard practice now, or that blue screen is easier to do now than a matte painting would be, is, I think, the concern. The concern is, how do we get to a point where one option is the default option, and we're acting like we don't have other things we could be doing. And that's why movies like Wes Anderson's hold up so well, is because he's intentionally going against the grain of what the easy thing to do is, and he's not just assuming that there is this disengaged experience of everyone just wants everything to look good on with CG and blue screens. He's playing off the choices we don't make anymore to make his films unique.
I mean, I think it's a very interesting level of conversation to talk about it in that way. But I think that this is just the nature of how these things work. That a new technology comes along that makes something simpler. Because, like, think about the process for matte painting versus the process for doing a blue screen and creating a digital environment. Like, I've shown you in Maya, which I don't have anymore, it makes me sad, but I've shown you in Maya, like, hey, Steve, you want me to create, like, a cool space background? Yeah, sure, I guess I could watch you do that. Alright, done. It's just take the paintbrush, draw stars. The end. Like, the process of work for creating digital backgrounds for actors via blue screen is just so much faster and easier of turnaround. It kind of makes sense that that would be the more natural go-to, that you wouldn't want to waste your budget making a painting that takes fucking hours of somebody's life, days upon days of someone's work, just for the background, only to get on set to film and then decide, oh, we can't use this location, where we're not using this shot anymore, we can't do this thing anymore, this painting doesn't work, this creates a continuity error, yada 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 yada. Which is a thing that happened in industry with matte paintings. So just that distinction of, well, was it a conscious choice to do this thing? I think it's just kind of the natural desire to do the thing that is less time-consuming work. It's just faster turnaround for your production to do a blue screen than it is to do a matte painting.
But okay,
and I think
that's
this,
the problem.
again, not to narrow it down, is this goes for just about a billion other things, but I think this is a good subject of focus.
But so here's the problem with that, though, is it's not that this one thing has become easier, therefore the process has become easier. It's that you're taking the amount of time you would have spent doing one thing and transferring that amount of time to a different stage in the process. That's the whole argument when it comes to things like digital is cheaper than film. Certain aspects of film are very expensive, and we have just transferred the cost of that to a different steps when it comes to digital. And the thing about technology is a lot of people have this tendency to reduce down technology's progress as if it is natural. I remember when you and I were talking about economics one day, and you said how it was basically voodoo for math nerds. And so, like, the idea that, like, there is an invincible hand of the market, the idea that there is some kind of natural state in the economy that seeks equilibrium, all of this bullshit that they teach you in Intro to Econ, all of that creates the illusion that the things that are happening in the economy are natural, that people making choices are all creating forces that are allowing certain things to happen as if they are by nature. And technology gets talked about in the same way, where in both cases, the argument is that these things are going to be inevitable, when in actuality it takes a whole lot of conscious effort and choices to make these things appear natural in the first place. So it's not that there is a natural desire to go from matte paintings to blue screen and CG technology because it's easier. It's that the landscape has to significantly shift through intentional means so that one thing's time-consuming aspects are made more apparent, whereas the other thing's new time-consuming aspects are made to seem like they're not as important. And that's the problem I have, is that it's not that one's better than the other, it's not that one's good and one's bad, it's that the way we talk about these things is we tend to fail to consider that the changes that we're making to our behavior to accommodate these things are a result of the technology existing in the first place. My favorite example of this is the Roomba, which is the Roombas. No one really has a Roomba anymore, so I'll explain real quick. But a Roomba is basically just a
I have
robot
a
that
Roomba.
vacuums your floor, right? You buy the Roomba, you turn it on, and it just cleans your floor. The problem with a Roomba is that it's extremely stupid. So if you just turn it on and leave your house, it'll probably just sit there hitting its head against your chair for like 6 hours. So the way to use a Roomba is you have to reorient your furniture in your living room so that the Roomba has a natural path to clean everything around it. But that's the problem in a nutshell, right? It's that when you start rearranging your life to accommodate the technology that we've developed, instead of developing technology that accommodates the life you have right now, and you're not actively thinking about those choices you're making, you run into problems where the technology is allowed to run away with itself and we're not considering the deeper impacts of them. The idea that digital technology exists as a new step in filmmaking progress was championed in a lot of positive ways. The problem is we weren't allowed to come up with the ways it would naturally integrate with what we were already doing. We were forced to haul over in massive ways without a choice. And that's the problem a lot of this stuff has. It's the problem that streaming services have. There's that article we talked about a few weeks ago about how sound is getting so hard to hear in films. It's because now that everything is going on a streaming platform, the level of sound mixing you have to do to make something audible in a theater, on a TV, on Netflix, on Hulu, on Prime is absolutely insane. It's a completely unrealistic task. But those technologies are all here now, and we are forcing people to accommodate to them instead of creating technologies that accommodate the way we live right now.
I don't know. I guess, like, I see where you're coming from with the thing, but I guess my question, my counter would be, isn't that just the way that these things work?
But isn't that the problem? Isn't that
okay?
the
But here's my question though. Can you name a technological innovation where we did it the way you're talking about, like the ideal is? Like fucking gas lamps, electrical lights. So many of these things have had massive oh, sorry, I'm being too loud for my child. I'm sorry.
The input for your mic changed because your audio changed like drastically a minute there.
Yeah, I just had to stop talking so loudly. But like, here's my question though: is like, isn't that just the way that technology works? Isn't that just the thing that, like, oh, here's the new way of doing it? And, like, I feel like we've been making fun of this shit since at least Looney Tunes, if not for thousands of years.
Well, but see,
where
I don't
you
think
just have like these more complex things that make life more complex and harder in the name of making it easier. Fucking Chaplin made fun of this in modern times, right? With the machine that allows the worker to eat in a more efficient way, and it's just the most like unpleasant eating method possible and stuff. Like, I guess my counter would be, can you name a major societal shift in technology that was handled in the way in which you are describing it?
So I'm going to reject
what you're describing, just how technology functions in our lives.
So I'm going to reject the premise of the question, because the premise of the question.
So that's a no.
No,
that's a no.
I'm saying that you're asking me a question that just proves your point instead of getting into the meat of what I'm saying, because that's not the point. The point is not, have we ever done a technology that has addressed things that has been addressed in an ideal way? The problem is the human being's relationship to technology is a thing that is complicated, and historically we always fail at trying to use the technology in a way that suits being human, as opposed to converting what being human is to be like technology. So back in the 1600s, when I think it was Leibniz was working on his, basically he was trying to create an early concept of a computer, and eventually stumbled onto the idea of binary. And so the idea was, if you get a computer to start thinking in binary code, to start doing the mental math that you don't need to do, so that you can focus on other things. So why do you need someone to waste time in argument thinking about what an answer to a long division problem is? You can pawn off all of that thinking, quote unquote, to a machine, and then use your brain to start thinking about things that only human beings are capable of thinking of. The problem with that view was that over time, what ended up happening is that people, instead of people pawning off unnecessary thoughts like math to machines, the way machines were thinking started being seen as the norm for how human beings should think. So you went from, let's let a computer handle this so I can go about my life, to let's let algorithms determine how our life should be lived in the first place. And so the problem I have is that technology constantly creates these incentives to live your life differently in order to better suit it. So we design a car to get from one place to the other. We have to entirely redo cities or come up with the concept of cities and suburbs and roads to accommodate this new technology that we have created. And that's always going to be a problem. The problem in the specific instances of filmmaking is that when technologies evolve at an extremely rapid rate, you have less time to cut it off when it starts making massive swings. And the faster technology evolves, as it does now, the less time we have to be aware of the way it's changing how we interact with the world. We went very, very quickly from traditional film to digital technology almost overnight in the grand scheme of history. And because that shift happened on such a systemic industry-wide level that you couldn't avoid doing it, it robbed people of making the choice of figuring out how they wanted to relate to that technology. And technology has a tendency to do this all the time. The problem I have is that the more we let this happen, the harder and harder it is for us to make the choices about what we want to be doing with these new innovations we make. The LED screens were a great idea for The Mandalorian, especially in a world with COVID, where you couldn't go outside, where you couldn't shoot on set. It was a technology that was created in response to a social problem. And then the technology started becoming industry standard to the point where, regardless of whether you need it, this is just how we do things. And those are two very different things. It's one thing to say, let's create CGI for the T-1000 because that's the only way to do it for the story I'm trying to tell, versus let's dump all of this into CGI so we don't have to hire makeup artists anymore. You see what I mean?
No, I do. It's just, I don't know, this becomes very quickly like, well, technology is bad and therefore scary. And like, so I guess I begin to question, well, what's your alternative then? Return to monkey? Like, I don't
know. I mean, it's not that. It's not the technology. It's not that technology is scary. But I mean, again, we've had tons of people using technology in smart ways to do this. When we talk about Knives Out, about creating the look of film with digital technology for the purposes of that story, or like with Lucas and Cameron, where we create camera movements that exist in our world with technologies to show us things that we could never see otherwise. It's not that we stop doing this. It's that we have to be smarter about how we do it. But the more we start talking about technology as if it's inevitable, the more we say things like, well, why don't we just use the CGI because it's easier? Why don't we just use the blue screen because it looks more realistic? I think that is the wrong frame of mind to approach these questions. Because the question isn't, does this look more realistic? Is this cheaper? Is this the industry standard? The question is, if this is the thing you want to do, what technologies best enhance your vision? Not, what am I limited in doing based on the technology that's around me? You wouldn't get George Lucas or James Cameron if they constructed their vision around the technologies that were available. They created technologies to accommodate what they saw in the world and what they wanted to make. But we're kind of running up on the back end of that now, which is, these are all of the things that are available to us, and we need to constantly think inside of the box instead of determining that box.
I don't know. I think you're definitely right, but I think you're right in like that philosopher way of like, okay, what do we do about it? Nothing. We think really hard. Like I don't think there's really a solution to what you're discussing, because the fucking genie's out of the bottle, right? Like the box has been open. I don't think you're going to close that box, no matter how many people like rant and rave against it, because then you're kind of getting into that Nolan camp of, well, they didn't even try to create a giant rotating hallway that you could have Joseph Gordon-Levitt run around in. Well, yeah, Chris, I mean, it looks epic, but at the same time, when the CGI has gotten to the point where people saw that shot and said, wait, no, they filmed that for real? Huh, that's cool. Like, when the default becomes, oh yeah, that part's CGI, then there's certainly the artistic merit, there's certainly the cool factor, there's things to consider for how cool something looks to shoot it real in camera versus to craft it in CG. But if the end result is indiscernible from most audience goers, then my question becomes, well, was it worth the extra effort? Which one was easier to do?
But I think
I'm
it's
not.
also
I'm
worth
not talking about the artistic integrity of the thing. I'm just talking about why is one solution seen, perceived, thought of as easier when it's not actually easier. It's just the only solution we think to use. Because
I don't know,
CG
man.
is not
Listen.
inherently easier than doing anything else. It's just that you don't see what's hard about it out up front the same way you do with practical. That's the
I
problem.
mean,
Like, sure,
Steve,
creating a
making
CGI
a
spinning room seems easier on a certain level, but everything else that goes into figuring that out is just transferring how hard it is to build the set to other parts of the process. That's the problem.
yeah, but like okay. Yes, because you have like, oh well, what kind of software are you using? Is this an industry standard? Is this a Maya, or is this like a VFX house's in-house software that they develop and use themselves? The labor and intensity that goes into writing the code, the render farm that goes into sending that out. There's a billion fucking steps to these things. But I feel like I can make the same kinds of arguments depending on how abstract you're willing to get about the practical side of it too, because, well, where did you get the steel?
Sure.
How many welders did you get? Like,
Sure.
is it...
See, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? Like, you're making my point. My point is, both of these things are kind of equivalent, but we are thinking of them as if one is easier when it's not actually. I'm not saying
Well, okay, but
practical
here's
is
the
easier than
distinction.
digital. I'm just saying the default assumption that digital is easier is wrong.
Well, no, I do think that it is... it's not always easier.
Right, exactly.
But I think
That's what I'm saying.
there's a strong argument for it, because...
Well, no.
Let's hold on. Let me make my point. Let me make my point though.
Right.
Let me make my point though. Okay. So, like, let's take the Inception rotating hallway as the example. So, you can make the argument that these things even out depending on how abstract you want to get when we talk about like steel mills versus render farms and stuff. Here's the distinction. Once you create the CGI program that allows you to create that hallway and create the physics simulations and create the fucking digital Joseph Gordon-Levitt and yada yada yada, you have infrastructure then. All of that stuff is not just useful the one time. Now you are ready to make architecture and fluid simulations and dynamics and stuff for multiple projects after the fact. Whereas when you put the infrastructure into creating a giant mechanism to spin a hallway in real life in camera, you created one spinning hallway in real life in camera that then has to be torn down and destroyed after the fact. So I'd say digital is easier in a way because any work and investment you put into the programs to create the effect you want to put on film, that is investment. Whereas a lot of the efforts that go into practical is a one-time drop.
Okay, but that's not true. Because the digital architecture and the digital files that you keep for one project, because of the high turnover rate and upgrades to digital technology on such a massive scale constantly, make it so that by the time you have completed one project, the landscape of what the new industry standard has effectively changed. There's a reason that Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has looked different every single time he's appeared, because Marvel uses different studios who use different proprietary technology, or even if they use the same houses to do it, they have new ways of doing these things. Aside from like
Yeah, for like
Pixar,
an individual character. I'm not saying you're going to use the same textures.
no, but see, but the argument that the one digital investment is an investment for the future is not completely true, because the digital investment is kind of on par with the physical investment, because you get the amount of output you can get with the one experience of creating like a digital spinning room does not necessarily translate to that technology in bits and pieces being useful in the long term, because these technologies are not always designed to be brought forward in the same way. Just like a spinning room that you make one time that's designed to be torn apart at the end of the process is not going to be helpful in 5 years if someone else wants to do something different, because the way we would create a spinning room 5 years from now is probably going to be different. The other example I wanted to go for, though, to better prove this point, is the argument for something like Marvel Studios farming out so much of its operation to be CGI and blue screen so that they can, one, get around unions for costume and makeup design, but two, come to different decisions at very, very late stages in the process based on focus groups and test screenings of the pre-rendered effects. Disney, under certain test screenings, actually uses technology to track eye movements of the audience so that they can change the film to better get people to stare at the screen. And I think we talked about this last week, but Marvel also has people who worked on Marvel movies have talked about how Marvel can never make up their mind about what they want something to look like digitally. And so you get things like the She-Hulk design that have gone through multiple iterations because no one can make up their mind about what it's supposed to look like. The reason Marvel movies look like shit lately has nothing to do with the fact that CGI is good or bad. It has everything to do with the fact that Marvel as a company assumes that CGI is easier and better, but they don't actually care about what they're trying to make at the end result of that. It's one thing to be like, yeah, maybe digitally creating Hellboy now would be a lot easier and cheaper than making Ron Perlman sit through 9 hours of makeup. I am not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying the assumption on an industry scale to just do that wholesale for everything and giving people the rhetoric that it's better because it's easier is false.
I mean, you're right in the broadest sense, but for every example that you can come up with...
I've just given you multiple examples. Come on.
Yes, but for every example you can come up with, I can make an argument against it or come up with a counterexample. Like, I've been involved lightly with digital work between, you know, things like chroma key work and 3D and modeling and animation and stuff. So when you say, oh, well, those processes, those things aren't standard anymore, I mean, they are. They all build off of each other. So, like, fluid sims, I think, is a really good example. Because the kind of fluid simulations that you can do now are about 1 billion times better than you could do back in the day on something like Abyss, James Cameron's The Abyss. And it's because the groundwork that was started like in the 90s for doing fluid simulations on or in CG programs for film has gotten better and better and better. So to keep on the fluid example, if I'm remembering this correctly, I could be wrong on this, so forgive me if I'm getting some of my details mixed up. If you watch Spider-Man Far From Home, there's the scene in Venice with the big fake water monster that Mysterio sicked on the city. the house that did the effects for the water monster himself. So they didn't do Spider-Man swinging, they didn't do Mysterio for that scene. They just did the water monster. And they did these amazing particle simulations and fluid dynamics to create this water monster. That's all they do. That one studio just does water fluid simulations. And if I'm remembering this correctly, they are the same studio that did The Abyss, and that's all they've done, is just gotten better and better and better about finding ways to create fluid simulations. So the investment in the 1999 version of their fluid simulation software for their in-house programming is, you're right, it has changed drastically between Far From Home's 2018, 2019. They're Far From Home level simulation. But it's been an investment, it's been a growing thing that they've kept building on and adding to and refining, as opposed to a one-time sunk cost and then they have to find a completely different way to do it.
I think you're responding to parts of my argument that are not my point. Because my point isn't that there are no such things as cases where CGI is clearly better and cheaper. My argument is that the assumption that it's always better is literally wrong, because it's not always better.
I mean, sure, every absolute is fucking wrong.
Right, but the ethos of how we talk about film and technology in relationship to film and a lot of other things assumes the absolute all the time as an absolute. My problem is technology, when we talk about it, we say things like, this is just the natural progression of things. We say things like CGI is just standard bar none cheaper. We say things like blue screen always looks better than matte painting. None of those statements are accurate. And where we can say in regular conversation, no absolute is true, the way we talk about technology always seems to err on the side of the absolute when it doesn't have to. And by doing that, it creates a really false assumption about what the actual problem is. Because the problem isn't that the technology is bad. The problem is the way we talk about the technology makes it seem like it's doing a lot more than it's actually doing, and thereby we give it more liberty than we should actually give it. That's all I'm saying.
Disagree.
I don't know how you can disagree with that, because I feel like that's
I disagree because I disagree because the alternative does not exist.
No, that's literally not true, because you're just literally proving my point. You're literally proving my point by saying something that I just said is the problem.
No, the alternative doesn't exist.
No, that is literally not true.
There is not a way to function in reality that does not placate to letting technology run rampant.
I'm not saying that. I am literally not saying that. I am not saying that there has to be an alternative mode of existence. I'm saying the way...
Well, then what do you do with the problem then, Steve?
How do you solve the problem? That's all I'm saying, is that you talk about it differently.
How do you solve it? How do you solve the problem?
My problem is how we talk about technology on this podcast, which is a thing where you talk about things. So my argument is that how we talk about this thing should matter. That's all I'm saying.
All right, well, okay. That point is well received and perfectly understood by everyone. It doesn't sound like you're beating semantics into the ground at all.
Because I'm not.
And I'm still going to 100%.
I'm literally...
I went into this conversation.
I went into this... steer.
I went into this conversation kind of more on the fence and like, yeah, no, I think I'm mainly like in the, just fuck it, technological innovation, go drill, baby, drill. But maybe not 100%. You know, there is still like some validity to the old way. And I've become so enraged in the like mind fuck maze of what exactly is your point, Steve, to the point of it just being, no, I just want to talk about it differently, that I'm just like, nah, fuck it, drill baby drill. Always technology. I hope every person that's ever done a matte painting like loses their job tomorrow. Like, even if they're not in industry anymore. Just because I'm just so pissed now.
Matt, what do you think?
I think you can build a cool rotating room, or you can do it in CG, but at the end of the day, one of those is going to look better longer. And you can be George Lucas, and you can complain that the sequel trilogy uses too many practical effects and not enough digital, but those movies will look better for longer than any of his prequel films. I think that drilling is great, and drilling is cool, and the Tarkin thing in Rogue One is kind of neato, and like all this shit is cool, but at the end of the day, there are situations where you could conceivably engineer a digital solution where a practical solution would not only look good, but it would look good for longer, and it would stay looking good for longer. But that does not mean we should not continue looking for those solutions, because like in The Abyss, like in Terminator 2, there are things that cannot be achieved without the aid of computers. However, for things that can be achieved without the aid of computers, I think it's a worthwhile goal to attempt to do that, because Ron Perlman Hellboy makeup, Vecna in Stranger Things Season 4 makeup will always look better longer than doing those things fully CG or doing them fully computer animated and things like that. So like, I feel like divorcing this conversation entirely away from the artistic intent would be pointless, because at the end of the day, what matters is how the technology is being used for the artistic intent. And I am with Steve that using the technology just to use it when there are other methods available can often be bad. But I'm with Ian, which is that if you don't push technology, you're never going to know what it's capable of. So I'm just going to sit on this fence like I've been doing, and I'm going to continue doing that until
Matt seriously just became the quiet kid in the corner, like, oh no, I don't want to fight.
I don't have super strong opinions about this. Like, well, okay, I'm sorry. I should rephrase that. I have strong but conflicting opinions. My opinions being, technology's cool. It's neat that we can do stuff. I like when we can do stuff. But don't get so fucking enthralled by your goddamn technology that you forget about this other really cool thing that you could do that would look a lot better just because it's a little bit older. Like, that's it. Like, I don't fucking, like,
Yeah,
it's a case-by-case basis. What are you trying to achieve? Is CG the best for that? Great. Is it not? Don't fucking use it.
That's literally all I have been saying for the last 30 minutes, is there are multiple ways to do things. We should not assume that one way of doing it is just always better.
No. Disagree.
No, I want them to use CGI even harder.
No, like, seriously, fucking Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. have left the MCU, but fuck it, digital doubles forever. Just Chris Evans digitally recreated on screen 12 more Captain America's movies. I'm so enraged after this conversation that I've fully... James Cameron has just come into my house and sat down with me, and we are writing the next 27 Avatar movies together now. Like, I'm so about it at this point.
What you like so vehemently disagree with about my point, because my point is really basic and very neutral, because all it's saying is that we should like think about the things we're doing. Like, I don't know what's so controversial about it.
I refuse to ever think more about this than I have over the last half hour, because all I've done is gotten pissed off. You've made me read a Kant paper, is what we've just done here, where instead of having like a conversation about the thing itself, we've had a conversation about the way we discuss the thing itself, and I'm fucking over it, and I hate you vehemently with every fiber of my being. And I'm gonna go write Avatar 22, the lost treasure of unobtainium, right now, and you can just fucking sit there and seethe over it, because I'm gonna make a point at which all of the Nani look directly at the screen and in their digitally made up language just look at the camera and say, Steve Baxi is wrong, embrace technology, reject monkey, return to modernity. That's just what we're gonna fucking do now.
Okay.
It's funny, like, in all seriousness, there is always a point at which you just went too far. Like, if I'm being generous, yeah, you flew too close to the sun. Corridor Digital, which is a YouTube channel, a bunch of VFX artists who just make basically shitpost videos, do a lot of really fun things. And one of the fun things they did is they beat James Cameron to Avatar 2, and they kind of parodied his obsessive need to push technology over just traditional visions of filmmaking, to the point where they used digital AI to generate a script for Avatar 2. Like, you know, those fucking websites you can go to where you feed it like X number of hours of this thing and then tell it to like produce a novel, and it's just the most like non sequitur filled thing in the world. Yeah, they used that to generate their script for Avatar 2, and they filmed it all, you know, mocap suits, the whole 9 yards. And it's unwatchable garbage, but it's funny as fuck. And the whole argument there is, I don't know if argument's the right word, but the whole joke there is, yeah, over-dependence on technology and having that as your only selling point of, well, look how far the technology's going. That it has its own host of problems and things to be concerned about, and, you know, end of the day, maybe it's kind of crap. But I'm so enraged by the conversation and the fact that, like, we keep going down fucking rabbit holes where I'm like, no, the practical real world applications of this do justify that choice, and being told, well, maybe they do, but the point is, should they? And I'm like, yes, just fucking yes, they should.
But, okay, but see,
so that's my answer now.
That's an oversimplification, because that's not true. The point isn't that practical justification justify this. It's that the things we assume are the practical justifications are actually bad and impractical. That not all of these things that we're talking about are inherently
You know, I own a
practical.
Roomba.
So, for example, another practical example, because I keep wanting to give you examples and you keep acting like I'm not giving you practical examples. For example, film preservationism, okay? So film preservationists have for a very long time, over the last 50 years or so, is predominantly people like Peter Bogdanovich and Martin Scorsese have tried to take old film canisters and preserve them and put back together films that were lost or get scenes back and stuff. When we watched Spartacus was a restoration of a movie that wasn't initially released that way back in the 1960s. Or The Other Side of the Wind, the Orson Welles movie that he shot over the course of 7 years that never actually got released or put together. It took a great deal of preservation and looking for old film canisters and stuff to get that thing stitched together and saved. Digital technology is assumed, because everything about digital technology gets assumed to be better for preservation, because you can save it all on hard drives, and that you just keep it all on a computer or digital files. As long as you're upgrading the places where it's stored on a relatively regular basis, you never run into a problem of the movie is just gone forever, because you can always print another one. This is not true. This is not a practical justification for digital over film, because as the Academy of Digital Arts has done a study of back in 2010, the technology that we actually store these things on is marketed as lasting 100 years. But we would be lucky if a lot of it lasts beyond 30. A lot of them are stored on hard drives that have to be spun in order to be played back, and that requires a tremendous amount of power. If those hard drives are not spun on a regular basis, they get corrupted and don't work anymore. The idea that that digital technology just keeps something saved forever and is better is literally just wrong, because it doesn't do that. It does, and if we keep assuming things like this technology is better at this just universally, instead of questioning the things it's better at and the things it's worse at, then we run into all of these problems of thinking that this way of saving our information for generations to come will pan out when it actually won't. There are a myriad of examples where we've created technologies marketed on the premise of this is better because it's more practical. And in many of those cases, those practical considerations were not very practical and did not come true. And that is all I'm saying.
I mean, I think it's in the nature of innovation in technology to promise something without really being upfront or even considering, in some cases, problems and fail-safes with it.
Or just, as is the case with a lot of tech companies, straight up lying about what you are promising.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the Silicon Valley way. That being said, are those false concerns, or not false concerns, all those false promises, like, does it leave you in a situation that is any worse than the situation you were in to begin with? Because I'll bring up this one again. Doctor Who. Watching classic Doctor Who. Was watching an episode today, and it was the end of an arc, and it had a really cool cliffhanger where the Doctor just straight up turned invisible. And I was like, holy fuck. And then it said, next time, the Celestial Toymaker. Then the next episode started playing, and it was fucking Western setting, and some fucking thing came up on screen that was completely different arc title. And I was like, oh, this. And I looked it up, and sure enough, the Celestial Toymaker was a 4-part serial, and 3 out of 4 of the episodes, all but the last one, are gone, because the BBC did absolute shit job of archiving and saving the episodes, because they just didn't think anyone gave a fuck. So the nature, though, of we can save this thing on canisters and save the film, and, you know, assuming the canisters are stored in proper climate-controlled environments that are fully sealed and closed up, they're not being opened, there's not a fucking fire in the warehouse where they're being stored, all these practical things that can go wrong. Is the problem with the hard drives, with the data getting corrupted, is that any different? Does that leave you in a different place?
Yeah.
And the answer is no.
I think, again, it's a very simple question of, it's not that the problems go away, it's that we deal with different problems, and we're not prepared to deal with the different problems if we fail to admit that there were problems in the first place. So, another example, okay? Another practical example. Back in the 1940s, we had the Paramount consent decrees, which basically meant that back in the day, studios owned theaters, and the theaters would show whatever the studio wanted them to. And when the Paramount consent decrees came down, they basically broke up the monopolies major studios had on theaters and said, you can't own the distribution networks anymore. You have to separate, because else it just turns into one big monopoly where you just show the same movies over and over again, and you don't produce anything new. In July of 2020, those decrees got repealed. And if you've been paying attention to the way digital landscapes have been going the last few years, it turns out that those laws really weren't doing anything anymore, because major studios couldn't own theaters anymore, but they could own streaming platforms. So Warner Brothers has HBO Max, Disney has Hulu and Disney Plus, Paramount has Paramount Plus. The repeal of the consent decrees was basically just a symbolic gesture at this point, because the studios found a workaround to get around them by saying, fine, we won't do theaters anymore, we'll shift the industry's landscape to be geared towards streaming, and then we'll just own the streaming. And so you had a certain set of problems that presented themselves in the 1940s when the theaters were all owned by the studios, that are now very similar, but expressed differently problems now that all of the studios just own streaming services. That's what I mean. It's all just a question of the problems that we're facing are just evolutions or different expressions of the things that we were dealing with before. But when we assume things like, I'm glad I have Netflix so I don't have to deal with linear cable, as if that's better, we're ignoring what we mean by better, and we're ignoring the different problems that this is creating. It's not that Netflix isn't better than cable, it's that the things Netflix is better at also creates things that Netflix is worse at. And we can't just pretend like those things don't exist.
I'm gonna pretend those things don't exist because I know it bothers you in your heart of hearts. That's my solution, Steve. I'm just gonna troll you from now on. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna buy every streaming service. And
You say that like I don't own every streaming service.
I know, right? Like it's the ultimate hypocrisy. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when one of my philosophy professors, we did a whole lesson talking about the speciesist argument in regards to why you should be vegetarian. And he did pretty much the Socratic method where he just sat there and made the speciesist argument, and any counter argument anyone made, he just argued against. And then the next day we come to class and we're doing stuff, and one of the students goes, "Man, I saw you eating at Burger King after all of that. After everything you said, I saw you eating a fucking Whopper." And he's like, "Yeah, I was making the argument. I don't actually believe it." And like everyone was enraged, but one student was like, "And I was just disappointed in you for failing to live up to those arguments you were making." And then he's like, "That one hurt the most, honestly." So it's just one of those things, like, the whole time, especially when you start bringing up the streaming thing, I was like, "Steve, you fuck. I know what you fucking do. I want to fucking jump through this cable. I can't wait till they invent that technology. I don't care what kind of consequences it comes with. I'm doing it. I'm jumping through the screen and punching Steve Baxley in the throat. I'm gonna do it."
And I mean, I feel like, and after this I will shut up, I promise. As someone that spends a lot of time criticizing technology, there is that sort of easy gotcha of like, you complain about Twitter, yet you are on Twitter. What gives? And this kind of boils down to what my point always is, that I feel like it's reduced down into just seeming like I'm anti-technology all the time, because I'm not. My point is simply this. The way you use technology impacts the way you live your life. And the technologies you have access to determine in certain ways how you can live your life. If you work from home, that is a way technology is determining your life. If you go to the office, driving on the interstate, that is a way technology is determining your life. These are not inherently good or bad things. They are driven entirely by the context in which you use them. Twitter is bad for a lot of reasons. Twitter is good for a lot of reasons. I have a lot of reasons to hate Twitter. But that doesn't mean that no one should have a Twitter. It just means you need to be smart, or at least self-aware about how you use Twitter. So I can say all day how much I hate social media and still have a Twitter, because how I use social media is consistent with the problems I have with social media. I'm not complaining on Twitter in long threads about how Twitter threads are bad. I just don't tweet anymore. I just have it to have it. Or like Facebook's a good example of this. Facebook, if you don't have a Facebook account, anytime someone that has your cell phone number runs a import phone contacts into Facebook to find friends thing, to find all your friends that you share on your phone contacts, it stores your phone number, and then it gathers all the other data associated with that phone number from everyone else's phone and creates a shadow account. So if you don't have a Facebook, Facebook has more anonymous data about you than if you would have a Facebook. So it's smarter to have a Facebook and not use it than it is to not have a Facebook. And so this is all I mean, is that you just need to be smart about the way you're using technology, specifically if you're aware of the problems. And the problem with a lot of filmmakers, just like there's a problem with a lot of individuals in the world, is that they get given this massive gift of technology and they just assume it's the right answer to everything all the time. And that's just not the case. Like Matt was saying, there's something to be said for why the prequels will never look as good as the sequels. And it has a lot to do with the filmmaking. But conversely, There's a reason why all the Disney Plus shows look like shit.
By that same
There's
token,
also a reason.
By the same token, Citizen Kane's special effects will never look as good as the Star Wars prequels. But I don't. Oh my god, I'm so fucking done. I don't know. I don't care. Technology is cool.
Yeah. See, I've won you over to my side.
No,
just fuck it. Just say it. It'll piss Steve off. Just say it.
I just wish I had brought popcorn to this great discussion. This is good. This is very entertaining for me. I felt like I learned a lot. I felt like I just watched two people debate something in an ethics class, so that was exciting for me.
We went a lot longer on this than I expected.
Well, that's just how it goes. Like this is what happens when we have an Alfie-free episode. Is no one comes in to just say, "No, wasn't this part fucking hype?" And then we just go down rabbit holes of like this is where the fact that Steve and I aren't actually friends and we just hate each other. This is when that becomes evident.
It's true. It's true. I hate Ian's guts.
I know.
Him and his fucking sniffly voice.
Oh, come full circle.
I'm just saying.
See, I should have known you were anti-technology then. You could clearly tell I had a superior mic because it's newer.
This is clearly how this works.
I'm just saying that if you made a good DBZ movie and you had to do a Kamehameha, you would not be able to do that without CG. So checkmate.
Mm-hmm.
Look, all I'm saying is, what will look better? The CG Kamehameha, or if I paint a roll of toilet paper blue and throw it really fast?
All right, well, I see your point. Your point is conceded.
One will clearly get shared on Twitter more.
One will clearly do a lot better on the TikTok algorithm, so come on now. Who's the real loser here?
Steve, you need to go do that and film a TikTok of it right now.
You know how long it would fucking take me to color toilet paper blue? Come on.
For what?
Like 5 seconds. All right, hold on. Because I'm the technology boy in this one, so I want to like put myself up against Steve's clearly superior mind here. Steve, if I give you a roll of toilet paper and tell you I need you to paint this blue for a shot, how are you gonna go about doing that? What's your method of attack? It's your job to do this now. You are getting paid to do this. What's your methodology here?
So I would take some other tube and I would paint the start of it blue, of the toilet paper blue, tape it to the other tube, and then just roll and color it as I'm rolling it into the other tube.
Okay. So you wouldn't just like dip it in blue paint because it's toilet paper and it's absorbent?
That would just make it unusable though, wouldn't it?
Or blue dye?
Again, wouldn't that just make it unusable because it's wet and it would just like start disintegrating?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that would fucking... At least I would try that first before I think about fucking painting each individual piece of
I just
toilet
assumed I would like take like a marker or something that wouldn't like literally rip the paper.
No, I'm just gonna fucking dye that shit real quick.
So here we have the two actual like symbols of this argument, which is the quick and dirty way, and the let's think about how we're doing this way.
I mean, worst case scenario, what? I lost a roll of toilet paper on the film set? Meh.
I mean, there are worse things to lose on a film set.
Yeah. Anyway, like your virginity. Yeah. There's some sad stories related to that one. Anyway, I think we're good. I think this is as much as we've needed to talk about this.
I don't even know if we really talked about the topic, but here we are.
I feel like we did. Like I said, my hope was by focusing on filmmaking, the topic wouldn't get super vague and confusing. So much for that.
I just think people need to think about how they use technology more. I don't know why this is so controversial.
I thought about how I use technology, and I fully dived at... My name is Ian Harrington, and I'm a futurist. Like that's my level of disdain for this topic now. Is I'm just 100% about it's more complicated and it's gonna actually increase the budget and it would look a lot better if we just like fucking painted a rat or something. Nah, do it in CG. That's just my. I am ready to become a Marvel executive now. I'm going over to James Cameron's house for a barbecue. We're gonna have digital meat. It'll be great.
There is something to be
that's
said for digital rats as opposed to Werner Herzog murdering a bunch of them on the set of Megaplexes.
right.
So,
Like,
there's something there.
I feel like all the negatives we talked about for like digital things, like this is the problem, is digital's in this place now where it kind of has to make the argument in a way, whereas you look back in like the history of filmmaking and how many like just horrifically fucked up things happened on set because that was the only way they could figure out how to do it, or that was the only way they were budgeted to do it. Like French Connection is a very famous film with a very famous car chase in which the lead actor, who is not a professional stunt driver, is driving a car through New York City chasing a monorail train, and he's like blaring on the horn. It's really intense, crazy. He has to like dodge a lady with a stroller at one point in the car chase, just to try to head off the suspect that jumped on the train to elude him because the main character is a police officer. And you know how they filmed that? They put the lead actor in a car in New York City and told him to drive really fast and follow that train, and then they just shot it all. They didn't close down the streets. They didn't get permits. They didn't have the budget for that. That was a real lady carrying her child that he almost hit. These are things that happened on film. Wizard of Oz is a fucking trip of some of the stuff they did. There's a scene where it snows in The Wizard of Oz. That's asbestos they're sprinkling on the actors. The original actor for the Tin Man had to drop out of the film because the silver paint they used actually formed a perfect seal around his skin and almost suffocated him.
Pretty sure it was lead paint too.
Yeah. There's a lot to the pitfalls of practical filmmaking as well here.
I mean, if you think Buster Keaton almost died on the set of that stunt, it's because he probably almost died on the set of that stunt.
Jackie Chan fucked up his whole life for every one of his films. Brendan Fraser's filmmaking career was both made and destroyed by the Mummy films because they made him such a huge star. They elevated his profile as an actor, but he could literally never make another film of that caliber again because the stunt work for those films completely ruined him physically.
Brendan Lee was shot and killed.
Brendan Lee was shot and killed on set. Alec Baldwin just killed someone.
Alec Baldwin just killed someone.
Like these are all the concerns of practical filmmaking. I don't know of digital filmmaking techniques that have, like, in and of themselves put someone's life on the line. The deadlines have caused tremendous emotional and physical strain on people.
Not to be facetious, but there are definitely lots of ethical problems with digital technology that I think we could spend a whole hour on, specifically when it comes to stuff like deepfakes and privacy issues and shit.
Oh, sure, but again, I'm talking about like life-threatening injury. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying I have a harder time thinking of it than I do with the myriad of like filmmaking things. Fucking Uma Thurman nearly killed herself on the set of Kill Bill, driving a car. Just a lot of shit.
These are all things where we talk about, are there better ways to do this, and are the ways we're doing them smart for the time? Because a lot of the reason stuff like French Connection or Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which did the exact same thing with the Tokyo car chase, do it this way is because they're trying to circumvent rules and safety procedures that would prevent them from doing this in the first place. Or something along the lines of, like, shit, I just had an example and I completely lost it. But there's a myriad of ways we do stunts practically that are governed by stunt workers, unions, and laws that a lot of classic films have tried to short stop so they didn't have to play by the rules. and that's created a bunch of problems. By the same token, digital technologies have done a lot of things that they were not designed to do by circumventing rules that they are just ignoring to make the process easier that they should not be doing. And both of these things are equally problematic in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting level of discussion. But I think I'm done with it. I think I'm mentally exhausted by now. Alright, we need a review topic for next week. Matt did Obi-Wan, so I guess it's on Steve Baxi.
Let's review something dumb and fun that just kind of goes hard because it's dumb and fun.
Steve, recommend a kung fu movie. I'm in the mood for a good kung fu movie.
I don't know if it's a good kung fu movie, but I did want to watch this again and talk about it. Let's talk about Batman: Soul of the Dragon.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
What do you have that the others don't, Steve? A cape. Oh, I'm so excited.
I was tempted to do the Catwoman Hunted movie because that's got a really hilarious horny scene I want to talk about, but I might just talk about it anyway the next week episode.
Oh shit!
You can do it. It's okay. This is Geeky Gentlemen, where we embrace the tangent. I haven't used that catchphrase in like 8 years, but here we are. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the George Lucas and James Cameron lover.
I'm the clippy erotica lover.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things. Matt, I'm dead curious. So is this like George X James, or what are we talking? Is it like
George?
George?
It's George